If you were to die suddenly tonight, if you weren't going to see tomorrow, have you become the person that you want to be? Folks, today I'm going to talk about how many preppers are setting themselves up for failure. And I'm even going to talk about my failures and how I'm learning from them. And this will be right after the channel intro. Remember, you are ultimately responsible for protecting yourself and for providing for yourself. Live your life with honor and integrity, and always be the wolf hunter. Don't be the sheep, and never be the wolf. My tomato crop has been really excellent this year. If SHTF were to happen, I could at least make spaghetti sauce to go with the pasta that I have in long-term food storage. Or I could make tomato soup out of them, or dice them up for stews, or at least add flavoring to some of the other dried goods that I have already in long-term food storage. These tomatoes grew so bushy and produced so many tomatoes that sometimes some of the branches would snap under the weight of all the tomatoes. But my big mistake was, well, I thought that all of the tomatoes would kind of ripen all around the same time, so I could just do a big day of canning them. So as they ripened a little bit at a time, I would bring them in small buckets, hoping that more would ripen before the ones that I'd already picked would go bad. And in the process of doing this, I wasted probably 20 or 30 pounds of tomatoes. So now it looks like I need to can them as they ripen. And while it may not be canning 20 jars at a time, at least they're not going to waste. And while working on this video, I even had my first jar of tomatoes, actually my very first jar of anything, explode on me while it was in the hot water bath. Now I have to figure out if I did something wrong or if that's just something that just happens sometimes. Another lesson I learned is that unless I'm expecting to feed quite a few people, that I probably should have used smaller jars than the quart-sized jars that I mostly used here. And my corn grew really tall and had some really huge ears on them also. But I waited too long to harvest them and they were pretty much inedible. And part of my garden, while not directly under a tree, some of it falls into the shade of a tree. And the plants that got partially shaded by that tree did horrible. So now I need to find out what vegetables do well in a partially shaded area and make a new growing area for the vegetables that need more sunlight. And I'm still learning how to compost, and I've built some of my own spinning compost bins, and they seem to be working just as well as the expensive store-bought one I purchased a couple of years ago. But the test for my composting will be next year when I see if it successfully replaces the nutrients in the soil used by my garden this year. My point of all this is that I'm learning while times are good, because whenever I fail right now, I'm able to run to the grocery store to keep food on my table. But if SHTF happens, there may not be a grocery store to go to. Or if we have an economic meltdown like Venezuela is having, the cost of bread may be sky high. Now I've got enough dried goods in long-term storage to feed my family at almost 3,000 calories a day for a full year. But learning how to produce and preserve your own food, I think, is an absolute must. First, it will add variety to your long-term storage dried goods. It'll add more to your diet rather than just the beans and rice that many preppers have stored back. And secondly, nobody knows how long SHTF or a second Great Depression could last. So producing your own food will not only add variety to your long-term storage food preps, but will also extend it. But honestly, these mistakes and failures that I've experienced, they don't really bother me that much. Me and my wife do many of these learning projects together, so even when we fail when learning a new skill, we're still spending time together and we're learning together. But each time that we fail at a skill, and each time that we do it, we get better at it. So my question to you is, are you learning and practicing these prepper skills? Are you learning how to grow and preserve your own food? Are you practicing any other prepper skills? Some of you may have grown up gardening and canning, but many of us preppers haven't. But are you one of those preppers who have just bought and put back a bunch of heirloom seeds and canning supplies and letting them collect dust until SHTF hits? Or are you practicing and learning them? You have to learn this stuff now while there's a learning curve, because you may have too many failures if you just try to wing it if SHTF happens. But even if you are a pretty good gardener, you also need to learn how to preserve the food that you've grown. You don't want to feast during the fall and then starve all winter long. My point of this video is, if you're one of those preppers who has bought a bunch of seeds and canning supplies and are just letting them sit in storage, make sure that you turn off your TV and get practicing and developing these and other prepper skills. Failure now is just a lesson learned, but failure during SHTF could mean you having to watch your family die. This is my second year learning how to SHTF garden, which means that I don't use any store-bought fertilizers or anything else to help my vegetables grow. And this is the second year in a row where I've had crop failures. And not because I didn't use fertilizer, but because I either planted in horrible soil, or I planted in too shady of an area, or I planted the vegetables too close together, or I waited too long to harvest them, etc. But every year I learn from my past mistakes. This year's garden produced a lot more vegetables than last year's garden, and I suspect next year's garden will produce even more. And if SHTF were to happen before next planting season, I'd still at least be ahead of most other people out there. So get yourself up off of your couch and start learning how to do this stuff, especially without using store-bought fertilizers and a bunch of gear and other stuff like that. Because unless you have some serious gardeners in your prepper retreat group, your plan to break out your supplies should SHTF suddenly hit may be a fatal mistake. So now I want you to comment below with what you have done for your preps in the last couple of weeks. What have you done to better prepare yourself if dark days fall upon us? Have you learned any new prepping skills? Or have you been practicing any of the skills that you've already learned? Or have you put back any food? Or have you done any training? Folks, if you like this video, please give it the thumbs up. And if you think other people will find this video useful also, then please share this on your favorite social media. And if you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to this channel, as I'll be doing many more videos down the road as time permits. Anyways, folks, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I pray that you have a good night.